Let's take a look at how we can find the 6 trigonometric values of negative 5 pi over 6. Again, using the 4 steps that we talk about in the notes that I gave you. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to sketch the angle. And sketching the angle negative 5 pi over 6, notice first that it's in radians, and notice second that it's negative. So when we go to sketch in the radians, we're going to put in the radians in a clockwise manner. So there's 0 radians. Here's negative pi over 2, here's pi, negative pi, excuse me, here's negative 3 pi over 2, and here's negative 2 pi. Again, negative's just giving us a direction in which to move them. So we have to figure out how to move 5/6 of a pi in a clockwise direction. Now, remember this over here is 1 full pi. We don't want to go 1 full pi. We're going a little bit less. We're going 5/6 of a pi. So we're over here in quadrant 3. And this is a good sketch. Remember, going in a clockwise manner of what negative 5 pi over 6 looks like. So now the second thing that we want to do after we're done sketching it is we want to find a reference angle. In regards to that, I'm going from 5 pi over 6, and this angle over here is my reference angle, and I need to go from 5 pi over 6 to 1 full pi. Now remember, 1 full pi in terms of 6 is 6 pi over 6. So if I traveled 5 pi over 6, and I have to close this arc over here by going to 6 pi over 6, that means I have to travel 1 more pi over 6. So we have a reference angle of pi over 6. Now, in regards to pi over 6, pi over 6 is the pi over 6, contains the terminal point of square root of 3 over 2 1/2. Okay, so we have a terminal point of square root of 3 over 2 1/2. And the last thing I'm going to notice here is that we are in quadrant 3, which means that both of these are negative. So to play with our signs, so negative square root of 3 over 2, negative 1/2. So if this is the unit circle, this ordered pair over here at 5 pi over 6 is at negative square root of 3 over 2, comma negative 1/2. Now we have enough information to gather in which we can find our exact trig values. So let's see, let's find the sine of negative 5 pi over 6. That's the y value of the ordered pair, so it's going to be negative 1/2. The cosine of negative 5 pi over 6 is the x value of the ordered pair, so it's going to be negative square root of 3 over 2. The tangent of 5 pi over 6, negative 5 pi over 6 is equal to the y value divided by the x value. And that's equivalent to saying, let's see, a negative divided by a negative is a positive. These are the same, so we can cancel them. So originally we get 1 over the square root of 3, and then we have to rationalize it, so we end up with the square root of 3 over 3. Once we have sine, cosine, tangent, cosecant of negative 5 pi over 6 is the same thing as saying the reciprocal of sine. So the reciprocal of negative 1 over 2 is negative 2 over 1, or negative 2. Secant of negative 5 pi over 6 is the same thing as the reciprocal of cosine. Cosine is negative square root of 3 over 2. So if we flip that, we get negative 2 over the square root of 3. And then we have to rationalize it. We get negative 2 square root of 3 over 3. And then cotangent of negative 5 pi over 6. Now remember, I can flip it at any point over here. So I could flip it at this point. I could flip it at this point. I could flip it at this point. They're all equal. And the point at which I want to flip it is this point right here, because first of all, I'm not going to be left with a complex fraction like what I have over here. And second of all, if I flip this, what's going to happen is this radical is going to be in the denominator's position, so I'll have to rationalize it again. So it's easiest to flip it when it's in this form over here. And so the cotangent of negative 5 pi over 6 is equal to the square root of 3 over 1, which is the same thing as saying the square root of 3.